This morning we're going to complete our pivot series, and we're going to cover how to automate a 3-to-many column pivot table. And so I'm not going to cover what we've already learned. In the description there's a link to the previous video which covers a 3-to-many. In the description of that video there's a link that covers how to automate a pivot table. Now we're going to learn how to automate a 3-to-many column pivot table. So let's kind of look at what I mean by a 3-to-many. Suppose that we have 3 columns and we want to output those 3 columns in a structure that's going to be denormalized data. But in the case of this example, let's just go ahead and look at what we're going to try to accomplish here. And like I said, it's going to be very similar to the 2-to-many. The difference is this time we want there to be basically a structure of 3. So what we want is we want the agent names to become the column. And you can see we're gonna apply the function to the calls. This is our integer field, but we want to keep track of the date too. So you want to see like how many calls did John receive on 24th, and Jennifer and Sarah and Jack, and then how many calls did they receive on the 23rd, and so on and so forth. So this is almost identical to the 2-column pivot. The difference is we're adding a non-pivot column. So it's the same exact code except this is added here. And then when we scroll down, when we do our select, our automated select, before the columns that we're going to line up, we're going to add the non-pivot column here. This is going to basically produce the date value, which you'll see in a second. In fact, to get this lined up, I'll go ahead and do this. And then we can review. We're also going to make sure that we add that non-pivot column to our sub-select. So notice in our sub-select, before we only had pivot column and calculation column. Now we're adding the non-pivot column as well. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to execute this. And I believe it was agent. The calculation column was calls. The non-pivot column was call date. The source table was calls, and the function that we're going to apply is going to be the sum. Okay, so let's go back and let's look at our data set. Make sure agent calls call date, that looks good. Okay, and okay, yeah. So yeah, let's go ahead and let's call this stored procedure. And so we'll notice, and again we can actually check. For instance, on the 24th, we see that you'll notice we have our date here, we have the names that become columns, and we have the sum. Now again, we can check it. If you have doubts, well, is that right? So Jack only received 4 calls on the 24th, so let's look at the 24th. Where's Jack? 4. This would be Jack 6 on the 23rd. Jack has 11 on the 23rd, so he had 6 there, so that means he needs 5 somewhere. Yep, and we have 5 here. So we can see what this does is this actually produces that pivot, except we've added this column here. Now, to put this briefly, 100% of the pivot tables that I've done in queries in the last 7-8 years have either involved 2 or 3 columns, in the sense of it's either going to be 3-to-many or 2-to-many. There may be a 4th or 5th, but those are, it's the 80-20 rule of business, right? 80% is going to be the 2 or 3-to-many. And we've already learned now how to automate all of that. Again, we could look at the max number of calls that they received on those days, which of course, obviously, in some cases, there weren't that many calls. So that's not going to be that important. Okay, so we've gotten all of that. Let's go ahead and drop this table. And also realize that the table doesn't just have to have, this is very, very important to note, the table doesn't just have to have those 3 columns. It could, in this case, notice, have 4 columns. We're only going to be passing in, let's go ahead and create this and do the insert, but we're just going to pass in the columns that we're concerned about. In fact, one of the earliest pivot tables that I actually built way back in the day, or at least it seems like it was way back in the day. I guess it wasn't, but it was like this. It had, I think, 17 columns total, and we were only looking at 2. So in this case, it's the same calls, call date, except we're not going to even look at outcome. And so this table is called calls to. Let's look at the sum again. Oops, not the sim. And you'll notice it produces the same output. We can also look at the count, how many values are there. So this table has 4 columns, but we're only looking at the 3 that we're doing the pivot on. So a couple of things to note. Again, this will work for 3 to many columns. It's automatic. You just use the stored procedure. If you are kind of wondering how the stored procedure works, you can go and look at the previous 2 videos. It covers how everything works. And then as well, the code on GitHub will be listed in the description right below the link to the previous video. So you can go there as well to get this. And that way now you no longer have to build any more pivot tables for 2 to many columns or 3 to many columns. It's completely automated for you.